Power has a way of shielding its own. An unspoken nod between judges, a subtle wink between officers, files that vanish, and evidence that seemingly never existed. It's a carefully choreographed dance that Elena Brooks has observed for years from behind her desk as a federal prosecutor. Each step preserves the illusion of justice while concealing a much darker reality. But tonight, the dance steps out of the shadows. Two police officers spot a black woman driving a luxury car and instinctively decide she doesn't belong. They don't recognize Elena as a federal prosecutor. She doesn't tell them. Because Elena Brooks understands something they don't. Sometimes the most dangerous person within a corrupt system isn't the one fighting it from the outside. It's the one willing to let herself be swallowed whole to expose the rot from within. The dashboard clock in Elena's silver Mercedes read 11:42 p.m. as she navigated the quiet streets of downtown. Her shoulders ached from a long day of poring over case files, her tailored blazer discarded in the passenger seat, leaving her in a simple black tank top. The cool September air drifted through the cracked window, brushing against her skin, keeping her alert. Streetlights painted long shadows over empty sidewalks, lending the city an eerie stillness. Elena exhaled deeply, adjusting the air conditioning. Tomorrow promised another mountain of work. The Whitaker case, a complex federal prosecution tangled with bureaucratic red tape. But tonight, all she craved was her bed and a glass of wine. Soft jazz played for the radio, easing the tension in her neck, but her mind kept circling back to the briefing she'd need to lead in the morning. 15 more minutes, she muttered, fighting a yawn. Her apartment wasn't far now, and she could already picture slipping into a hot bath. 2 blocks ahead, Officers Kayla Morris and Dean Whitlow sat idling in their patrol car. Caleb's coffee was cold, but he nursed it out of habit, the paper cup crumpled at the edges. Dean drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, eyes sharp, hunting for any excuse to make another stop. 12 years on the force had honed his instincts. Nights like these, cool and quiet, were perfect for fishing. They needed 2 more stops before their shift ended. That was the unspoken quota. "Check out the Benz," Dean said, straightening as Elena's car passed. The Mercedes brake lights flared briefly at an intersection before continuing on. "Late night for someone driving that through here," Caleb added with a knowing smirk. They didn't need to say more. The neighborhood didn't see luxury cars often, especially not driven by black women at this hour. Dean pulled out smoothly, tailing Elena. She noticed them immediately in her rearview mirror, but she didn't tense. This wasn't her first time being followed. She adjusted her grip on the steering wheel, keeping her hands at 10 and 2, her speed at the limit. It was a familiar dance, cops trailing, waiting for her to slip up. She made sure she didn't, but they weren't waiting for a reason. The flash of red and blue lights shattered the stillness. Elena's heart sank, but her face remained calm as she signaled and pulled to the curb. Her hands didn't shake as she reached for her registration, though her jaw clenched tight. The soft click of a flashlight against glass snapped her focus to the window. Officer Whitlow loomed, the beam aimed directly at her face, blinding. "License and registration," he barked. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Elena's voice was even, professional. Years of courtrooms had trained her to keep composure. "You rolled through that stop sign back there," Whitlow lied smoothly. "Been drinking tonight?" "No, sir. And I came to a complete stop at every intersection." Caleb appeared at Whitlow's shoulder, his own flashlight joining the interrogation. "That's not what we saw," Caleb said. Elena felt the familiar knot in her stomach. They were escalating. Her mind raced through protocols. Her phone sat on the center console. Quietly, as she unbuckled her seatbelt, she tapped the record button. Audio only. But enough. "I smell marijuana," Caleb announced suddenly, loud enough for the body cam. Elena clenched her teeth. Another lie. She hadn't been near marijuana in years, but she knew the drill. False claims justified searches. "That's impossible, officer." "Step out of the car," Whitlow ordered. "I don't consent to a search without probable cause," Elena replied, though she knew it didn't matter. Whitlow's face hardened. "Step out." His hand hovered over his holster, a silent threat. Elena complied, her hands raised. Caleb grabbed her wrist roughly, yanking her from the car. Her arm twisted painfully behind her back as cold steel cuffs bit into her skin. "You're under arrest for resisting," Whitlow declared. Elena barely kept from laughing. She wasn't resisting. She wasn't even moving. But she knew how the system worked. This was textbook escalation. Across the street, a young man stopped to record on his phone. Caleb spotted him instantly. "Move along," he barked, hand on his holster again. The man hesitated, torn between recording and self-preservation. He backed away, vanishing around the corner. Elena was alone. The night air felt sharp against her exposed arms as they shoved her against the patrol car, her cheek pressed to the cold metal. "I am not resisting," she stated clearly for the audio recording. Whitlow sneered. "We'll see how that plays in court." Her Mercedes disappeared behind a tow truck minutes later. She committed every detail to memory. Badge numbers, the feel of the cuffs, the sound of gravel beneath her shoes. Every piece would matter later. A system exposed. Hours later, Elena sat in a holding cell alongside two other women, strangers who'd been dragged into the same corrupt web. There was Tasha, a young woman arrested for a broken taillight that miraculously worked fine at the impound lot, and Denise, pulled over simply for driving through the wrong neighborhood. It wasn't new to Elena. She'd read hundreds of cases just like this. But now, she was living it. They swapped stories in low voices. Each tale was a carbon copy. Minor infractions exaggerated into criminal charges, fabricated smells of marijuana, resisting arrest claims that justified force. "They always say we ran a stop sign or smelled like weed," Tasha muttered bitterly. Elena nodded. It's the script. Her plan had been simple. Get arrested, experience the system firsthand, gather evidence. But now, inside the very machine she'd spent years prosecuting from the outside, she realized the scope was far worse. When her attorney, Marcus Hale, finally arrived, his expression was a blend of shock and pride. "You're insane," he whispered. "But this might actually work." They'd exposed something bigger than corrupt cops. This was systemic. From the street-level officers to the courtrooms that rubber-stamped their lies. "Ready to shake the tree?" Marcus asked. Elena grinned. "Let's burn it down." The collapse of corruption. What followed was a storm. Elena's identity as a federal prosecutor spread like wildfire the moment she revealed it in court. The arresting officers' faces turned ghostly pale. The judge, complicit in countless shady rulings, tried to maintain control, but it was too late. FBI agents, already working in tandem with Elena's team, stormed the courthouse, seizing files, issuing warrants. The fallout was swift. Officers Morris and Whitlow were arrested on charges ranging from falsifying reports to civil rights violations. Prosecutor Alan Briggs, who had repeatedly buried evidence of police misconduct, was named in an indictment. Even Judge Hawthorne, long suspected of favoring law enforcement at the expense of defendants' rights, was forced to resign. But Elena wasn't done. She partnered with civil rights groups, launched public investigations into wrongful convictions, and demanded systemic reforms. Community meetings that once went ignored were now packed with citizens finally being heard. The city's legal system cracked open like an overripe fruit, its rotten core laid bare. Justice finally served. Months later, Elena stood on the steps of the courthouse, a press conference flashing with cameras and microphones. This isn't about one bad officer or one corrupt prosecutor. It's about an entire system that protects its own at the expense of truth and justice. Her voice was steady, her message clear. Real change wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about dismantling the machinery that allowed them to operate in plain sight. In the crowd, she spotted familiar faces, Tasha, Denise, and dozens of others who'd once been victims. Now, they were activists, organizers, leaders in a movement that stretched far beyond the city. Power had shielded its own for too long. Now justice had its turn.